We're also going to be talking in just a few minutes with the reporter who broke this news today at Vanity Fair. On a day that was already a potential disaster for the sitting president of the United States in terms of his own exposure and liability in the Russia scandal and the investigation by the special counsel's office led by Robert Mueller, on a day that was already a disaster for the president, Emily Jane Fox at Vanity Fair added significant fuel to the fire with her exclusive reporting tonight that longtime Trump Organization executive, longtime personal lawyer to the president, Michael Cohen, has not just pled guilty to 8 felony counts. He has not just named the president in court under oath as the person who directed him to commit 2 of those felonies, campaign finance violations. Emily Jane Fox reports tonight that Michael Cohen, in addition, has begun meeting with the special counsel's office himself. When Michael Cohen pled guilty to those 8 felonies last month, there was no formal cooperation agreement with prosecutors that was filed along with his plea. But this new reporting, if correct, it indicates that Cohen is cooperating. He's talking with the special counsel. We're going to be speaking with Emily Jane Fox about that news in just a moment. But of course, that news comes at the worst possible time for President Trump. We have been reporting for the last couple of days that there were signs, right? And there were anonymously sourced reports that the president's campaign chairman was himself starting to talk to prosecutors about pleading guilty in federal court rather than facing another extended federal trial. He was just convicted on 8 felonies last month in Virginia. He was facing another trial on more felony counts starting next week in federal court in Washington, D.C. And, you know, while the president choosing this now multiply convicted felon as his campaign chairman is itself a pretty big scandal as U.S. presidents go, and while there is certainly public interest in the legal fate of the president's campaign chairman. How many felonies is he going to go down for? How long is he going to spend in prison? What are his prospects for his appeal or for retrial? All the rest of it. While there's a lot of interest in all of that stuff, clearly the even larger stake here in terms of the country and the presidency is not just Paul Manafort's own fate and the fact that President Trump chose him as his campaign chair. The largest stake here is the prospect that the president's own fate, the president's own liability, might be significantly jeopardized by what's going on with Manafort. That Manafort, in an effort to try to lessen his own jeopardy, his own prison time, might finally decide to cooperate with the special counsel's office in their ongoing investigation of Russian interference in the presidential election and any potential role in that interference by the president and his campaign. Right? That's the big kahuna, right? And it has always seemed very improbable. I mean, campaign chairman for sitting president pleads guilty to multiple felonies. Huge deal. Campaign chairman for sitting president pleads guilty to multiple felonies and also agrees to cooperate with prosecutors investigating the president himself. That has seemed impossible. That has seemed at least very, very improbable. Now that is what happened, and that is bigger than a huge deal. I mean, lots of reporting recently has wondered if a cooperation deal might happen. Most observers have thought there was no way, no how that Manafort would ever do this. If there's one thing Paul Manafort's not going to do, he's not going to cooperate. He would have done so by now if he was going to. Well, he is cooperating fully, no holds barred. I personally almost can't believe it even now, even though I've got it in writing. We just got the transcript. So I know that it happened, and now I can tell you exactly how it happened, word for word. You ready? Okay. Courtroom deputy. Your Honor, good morning. This morning we have case number 17-201-1, United States of America versus Paul J. Manafort, Jr. Mr. Manafort is present in the courtroom. Will counsel for the parties please approach the lectern? Identify yourself for the record. Mr. Weissman. Good morning, Your Honor. Andrew Weissman for the government. And with me at counsel table is Greg Andrus, Lorna Mosher, Kyle Freeney, Jeannie Rhee, and FBI Special Agents Omar Mizell and Jeff Weiland from the FBI. The judge. All right. Good morning. Then Mr. Westling. This is the defense side. Good morning, Your Honor. Richard Westling, Thomas Zenley, and Kevin Downing on behalf of Mr. Manafort. Good morning. The judge says good morning. And I note that Mr. Manafort is present. The judge. So I understand the defendant wishes to enter a plea of guilty. Is that correct? Mr. Westling. That's correct, Your Honor. The judge. All right. Before we can proceed any further, he can join you at the lectern. Then the courtroom deputy says, are you Paul J. Manafort, Jr.? Paul Manafort, the defendant. I am. Courtroom deputy. Are you the person named in the superseding information? Paul Manafort, the defendant. I am. Okay, so this is obviously the very start. This starts with the good mornings, right? And at this very early point in the proceeding, everybody there in the courtroom knows at least one important part of what's going to happen, right? The judge has said right off the bat, he's here to plead guilty, right? Yes, yes, Your Honor. And then the reason there is a superseding information, which is what the courtroom deputy just asked there to Paul Manafort, superseding information, I know it's a weird phrase, but what that means is that the indictment laying out the charges that Manafort was about to go on trial for next week, that indictment has now been replaced with a superseding document, a superseding information, a criminal information, instead of an indictment now. And that's what happens when prosecutors are bringing charges against you, but you're not fighting those charges. You're not going to trial over them. You're gonna plead guilty. So at this point, everybody in the courtroom knows he's gonna plead guilty. It's still a cliffhanger at this point, though. All right, so the judge says, so to get to the questions that I need to ask you in terms of your understanding of this morning's proceedings, can you tell me how old you are? The defendant, Paul Manafort, 69. The judge, and what is the highest level of education that you attained? Defendant, Paul Manafort, Juris Doctorate. The judge, and so obviously you can read and write? Paul Manafort, the defendant, I'm sorry? The judge, you can read and write? Paul Manafort, the defendant, I can. The judge, and where were you born, sir? Paul Manafort, New Britain, Connecticut. The judge, have you taken any alcohol or drugs in the last 48 hours? Paul Manafort, no. The judge, or any medicine that could affect your ability to understand what you're doing by pleading guilty this morning? Paul Manafort, no. The judge, have you ever received any kind of treatment for any mental illness or emotional disturbance? Paul Manafort, no. The judge, have you received a copy of the information, the new charges this morning, and the indictment that's pending against you? And have you fully discussed the charges and the case in general with your lawyers? Paul Manafort, I have. The judge, are you completely satisfied with the services of your lawyers in this case? Paul Manafort, I am. The judge, have you had enough time to discuss with them and discuss the case? Excuse me, to talk with them and discuss the case and the plea offer and whether or not you should accept it? Paul Manafort, I have. So they go through this preliminary stuff. You're okay, you're of sound mind, you are who you say you are. The judge then asks the prosecutor from Robert Mueller's office, the lead prosecutor, Andrew Weissman, to summarize the list of things to which Paul Manafort is going to plead guilty today, to describe his crimes. The judge says, Mr. Weissman, I would like you to explain orally what he's pleading guilty to and what this case would show if it went to trial. I will tell you, Andrew Weissman then does. You see all these pages on screen here? He goes on for 18 straight pages of transcript without interruption. I'm not going to read you all 18 pages. We'll save that for the special. But you should know, he goes on and on and on and on, to the point where the judge is basically like, okay, wow, that's a lot. I mean, from page 16, Weissman says, let me start with the first one, which is the Foreign Agent Registration Act conspiracy. From page 27, he says, let me speak briefly now about the conspiracy to obstruct justice, the false and misleading submissions to the Department of Justice. Page 29, let me turn to the money laundering conspiracy. Page 30, turning to the tax and foreign bank account conspiracy. Page 32, turning to the witness tampering conspiracy. Just goes on and on and on. Finally, the prosecutor stops talking after going on for 18 straight pages, telling the judge at the end of his remarks, basically he says, yeah, there's more in the statement of the offense here. I could go on, but it's all there in writing. At which point the judge exhales and says, all right, thank you. Turning to the defense, the judge says, Mr. Wessling and Mr. Manafort, quote, I believe it's fair to say that that's probably the longest and most detailed summary that has ever preceded this question. But is what the prosecutor just said a true and accurate description of what you did in this case? The defendant, Paul Manafort, I did. It is. The judge, so did you in fact participate and coordinate in public relations and lobbying efforts in the United States on behalf of the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian government officials and or political parties? Paul Manafort, I did. The judge, and as part of that, did you conspire in fact with other people to avoid U.S. tax laws, foreign bank account disclosure laws, laws requiring registration as a foreign agent, and to violate the money laundering statute, and to make false statements to the Department of Justice in 2016 in conjunction with that lobbying work in the United States? Paul Manafort, I did. The judge, and did you also, in fact, conspire with at least one other person to obstruct justice by tampering with witnesses concerning the FARA allegations in 2018? Paul Manafort, I did. So after 18 pages of laying it out by the prosecutor, the judge sums it up, and Paul Manafort admits to the court, admits to the judge, I did these things. And now he has to admit what he's going to give up because he's pleading guilty. The judge says, quote, you're agreeing to plead guilty to 2 counts of conspiracy against the United States. Do you understand that if I accept your guilty plea in this case, you could receive a maximum sentence of up to 5 years in prison on each count? Paul Manafort, I do. The judge, and do you also understand that for each count you could be sentenced to pay a fine of up to $250,000 for each? Do you understand that? Paul Manafort, I do. The judge, there are a significant number of forfeiture allegations in this case, and without going into too much detail, I want to make sure, Mr. Manafort, that you understand that as a result of this plea agreement, you are also agreeing to the forfeiture of a considerable amount of property. Do you understand that that includes 377 Union Street? Paul Manafort, I do. It also includes the real property at 29 Howard Street, apartment 4D. I do. Do you understand that includes the Jobs Lane house in New York? I do. And funds held in an account at the Federal Savings Bank? I do. And funds seized from an account at Capital One? I do. And funds seized from another account at the Federal Savings Bank? I do. An insurance policy with Northwestern Mutual? I do. And real property at Baxter Street in New York? I do. And also real property at Fifth Avenue in New York? I do. He's forfeiting all of those things, bank accounts, insurance policies, lots and lots of real estate, to the government. The government alleges that he defrauded the government of $15 million in money that he didn't pay taxes on. Part of making that up, clearly, is handing over his ill-gotten gains and the things he committed crimes in order to attain as real estate. But that last question there from the judge, real property at Baxter Street in New York, and also real property at Fifth Avenue in New York, that's the last one she asks. At that point, that's actually the first reference to President Trump. Because the Fifth Avenue property that Paul Manafort agreed in court today to forfeit to the government, that is Paul Manafort's apartment at Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. You might remember that Paul Manafort used the fact that he had an apartment at Trump Tower as one of the selling points for himself in his letter to the Trump campaign, in which he pitched himself for the campaign chairman job. Well, now the Justice Department owns Paul Manafort's old apartment in Trump Tower, which has to be a little unsettling for the president, I'd imagine. But then this very next part of the hearing is the part that is probably what the president didn't expect, and definitely what the president didn't want to hear. This is really the boom in today's news. The judge, quote, now, do you also understand that pursuant to this plea agreement, you are agreeing to cooperate fully and truthfully with the investigation being conducted by the Office of Special Counsel, including participating in interviews and debriefings, producing any documents in your control, and testifying and agreeing to delays of your sentencing at the request of the government? Do you understand that? Paul Manafort, I do. The judge, and these obligations under the agreement will continue even after your sentencing here and in the Eastern District of Virginia. Do you understand that? Manafort, I do. And I believe in the agreement it says you waive your right to have your counsel present for every interview and debriefing. Is that also correct? Paul Manafort, that's correct. So that's the boom here. That is the unexpected news today. I mean, him pleading guilty, which he does a short while later in the transcript. The judge says, are you prepared to tell me now whether you wish to plead guilty or whether you wish to go to trial? Manafort says, I am. The judge says, then what is your decision? Manafort says, I plead guilty. He pleads guilty. We knew that from the moment proceedings opened this morning, when the judge flat out said, you're here to plead guilty, right? We knew he was going to plead guilty from the moment he walked in the door. We did not know he would agree to cooperate. Now, based on the plea agreement, based on the back and forth with the judge today, from which we just got this transcript, it appears that Paul Manafort's cooperation agreement is the full Monty. He agrees to be fully debriefed and to attend all meetings at which his presence is requested. He agrees to give the government all documents and other material that may be relevant to the investigation. He agrees to participate in undercover activities. Not sure how that's going to work now. Hi, my name is Paul Manafort. Could you speak into my lapel, please? No, I don't know why I seem familiar to you. You can trust me, friend. I think Paul Manafort's not going undercover anytime soon, with or without the hair dye. He also agrees to testify at any proceeding, which means both trial or at grand juries. And this one's interesting to me. He agrees to be interviewed by law enforcement agents and or government attorneys, and he waives any right to have counsel during these interviews unless he submits the request in writing beforehand. So the judge singled this part out to ask him about. You know you can't have your lawyers there when you're talking to the investigators here, right? Paul Manafort, as part of this agreement, will have to talk to investigators and prosecutors about anything they want without his own lawyers present, unless he gets written permission in advance to have them there. I am intrigued by that. I'm also intrigued by this confirmation from the judge today that after this guilty plea and this cooperation agreement, Paul Manafort was sent back to jail today. And he will stay in jail until he is sentenced. And presumably he will not be sentenced until his cooperation is over to the satisfaction of the special counsel's office. So if you think about what's going to happen to Paul Manafort from here on out, he's going to go from court today, back to jail today, potentially to stay there for a very long time. I mean, could that be years while he continues to cooperate with the special counsel? And then after the end of his cooperation, then he will be sentenced for 8 felonies in Virginia and these 2 more in D.C., up to a maximum of 10 years in federal prison. And thereafter, the judge spells out that his cooperation responsibilities with the government will continue even after he is sentenced. Did I mention that this is the president's campaign chairman we're talking about here? So here's a few things to know. Prosecutors say that Paul Manafort gave his first proffer, his first offer of information, so his first cooperation, on Tuesday of this week. So he's been cooperating already for 4 days. Prosecutors spelled out that one of the things he pled guilty to today was a foreign-funded, illegal, and somewhat bizarre effort a few years ago to smear an Obama cabinet official as an anti-Semite for not supporting Paul Manafort's client in Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. That was spelled out in detail, not only in the written statement of the offense, but also in the verbal presentation by prosecutors today. And it seems clear from the context, even though they never said her name, that the cabinet official, Paul Manafort, was organizing this effort to smear, to promote pro-Russian interests back in 2012, was then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. So if this Manafort plea and his cooperation ends up linking back to a later foreign-funded, illegal, bizarre effort to smear Hillary Clinton for pro-Russian interests, not in 2012, but in 2015 and 2016 when she was running for president against Donald Trump, then this is probably the first sign of it in Manafort's guilty plea today. He pleads guilty to operating as an illegal, unregistered foreign agent running a scheme in this country to try to smear Hillary Clinton unfairly for not properly aligning herself with the pro-Russian interests he was working for. Can't imagine there might be any parallels with that we're going to hear down the line, right? This is the 8th person convicted or pleading guilty in Robert Mueller's investigation of Russian interference in the election. Robert Mueller is now batting 1,000 in terms of convictions and guilty pleas from everybody who he has pursued in court. He's also now batting 1,000 in terms of securing cooperation from every single American who has been charged in this case, including the president's national security advisor, the president's deputy campaign chair, and now the president's campaign chairman, who himself has decades worth of links to the former Soviet Union and whose business partner is believed by the FBI to be himself linked to Russian intelligence agencies. Half the world watching this is now expecting a pardon for Paul Manafort from the president, like maybe as soon as tonight, right? Half the world expects that pardon. Half the world thinks that would be nuts, and there's no way. But honestly, what counts as too improbable anymore?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.